Beyond the Pelvis is hosted by Dr. Keneal Siegel, a pelvic floor PT and intuitive healer, and Laura Haraka, a somatic practitioner and breathwork facilitator. Each week, we explore alternative and holistic approaches to healing chronic pelvic pain and other painful or chronic conditions. Join us and other experts in mind, body, and spiritual healing as we discuss a wealth of modalities ranging from ancient practices to modern therapies that challenge the conventional Western model of treatment. Let's get right to it.
So welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Pelvis. Today we have Tanner Murtagh here, the director of the Pain Psychotherapy Canada. Tanner is a therapist who primarily works with clients who have chronic pain or symptoms, anxiety, depression, and trauma. He is trained and experienced in treating chronic pain that has no structural cause, typically called neuroplastic pain or tension myoneural syndrome, better known as TMS. He utilizes pain reprocessing therapy, polyvagal theory, emotional awareness and expression therapy, somatic experiencing, and accelerated resolution therapy to support his clients in eliminating or greatly reducing their pain and symptoms. And his goal is to educate healthcare professionals and the public about the appropriate treatments for neuroplastic pain and mind-body. Thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, Tanner. So that was just like a brief background about your experience, but would you mind sharing a little bit more about how you ended up in this space? Especially if you have personal experience.
Yeah, so many years ago, I developed pretty widespread chronic pain. So this was in my early 20s, and I was in university at the time, and I didn't realize some of these things were triggers for my pain at the time. But at the time, I changed my major in school. I was about to propose to my partner. Like, there was a lot of big, exciting but big changes going on in my life at the time. And at first, I was training. I can be a pretty intense individual. I worked on that over the years. But at the time, I was training with my friend for my first triathlon ever. And so I was exercising like excessively, preparing for it. I was probably running 50, 60 kilometers a week. And then all of a sudden, after a run one day, I started to develop pain in my right knee. And I did what most people would do if they have a pain sensation. I went to physio and chiropractors. I iced it, I rested it, and it just wasn't getting better. No matter whatever I did, it just didn't get better. And so it was a couple months it went on, and then the pain started to spread. So I started to experience it. I think next was my left knee. And then I started to experience it in my shoulders over time. And the most debilitating pain, I had a lot of pain symptoms and other odd symptoms going on as well. But the most debilitating one was like my back and hips, because I just couldn't function as that started to worsen. So this went on about 3.5 or 4 years. And I think like a lot of people with chronic pain or symptoms, like my mental health just like deteriorated like further and further as it went on. So I was fairly depressed, shut down, or oscillating between that and like high anxiety. What happened is I just was so obsessed with getting the pain and symptoms to go away. I mean, like I was thinking about it 80-90% of the day, doing all sorts of treatment. I got scanned. Like every part of my body got scanned by the end of it. It was a real hopeless time that I was kind of going through at that point, because there was no big solution. And, doctors, medical professionals, they would find little things here and there. But I mean, there wasn't much being found that could explain it. And there was some debates of, what was going on in terms of my physical symptoms. And some people thought it was fibromyalgia. One doctor, in a very scary way, told me I had hypersensitive nerves and I was going to be in pain the rest of my life. So when you're having chronic pain and symptoms, that's definitely not what you want to hear. But like a lot of people in this mind body realm, my first introduction was with like Dr. Sarno's books. And so at the time I was up late one night and like came upon a YouTube video of someone talking about how they overcame their pain reading these books. And it's interesting looking back because I was a therapist and I was like getting trained to be a therapist. And I was like, there's no way this is happening to me. So I knew that that this was a way that chronic pain or symptoms could develop. Like I knew of the ideas, I had heard about it, I learned about it in school. And when that idea first came to me, like I was just angry. Like I remember ranting. I remember at first reading the book and hucking the book. Like I just like it was not like sticking, but over a number of months, like I was just so desperate that I came to the idea. I had an edge in this area because I knew lots of techniques therapeutically that I wasn't using at the time, but I probably should have been, and started to utilize some of these strategies, mind body work, and that included a lot of things for me over time. I think even when I work with clients, everyone's a little individual of what they need to heal. There's not like one big template that just works for every single person. But for myself, yeah, there was lots of things I focused on. Like I really had to change my belief system about my pain and symptoms, like understand that my body was actually okay, that this was more of like a brain and nervous system issue that was taking place. There was a lot of like brain retraining exercises I did on myself and a lot of exposure because I was barely moving by the end of it. So I really had to start moving my body and get exposure even to like walking at first. At the beginning before the pain started, I was like training for a triathlon. By the end, I mean, I was walking maybe like 5 minutes a day because it was so painful. And so there was a lot of like exposure that I needed to do to physical activities and teach my brain like, I'm safe to do this. I'm okay to start to engage in these things. And that's hard work. That's scary work for anyone who has to kind of go through that. And for myself, a lot of it was processing emotions, processing trauma from the past, like regulating my nervous system. Like I was so dysregulated, and even though I didn't realize it maybe so much at the time, even before that, since I was a child, I was very dysregulated. It just hit a point at, when my pain came on, that my brain and nervous system was just letting me know through kind of this sensitization that was taking place. And there was a lot of that work that I had to do as well, and changing the way that I lived. I like I said, I'm an intense person and perfectionist and people pleasing and all sorts of things. And I had to really start to work on some of those things as well. So what happened is as I started to do this over about the course of like 4 months, and at the time I was like getting married, like right when I started, which is terrifying because I had to like stand all day. Not to mention getting married can be terrifying, but I had to stand all day and I was more terrified about that than the fact I was getting married. But so like over the course of about 4 months, like the pain was no longer chronic. Like it was still there some of the time, but it wasn't chronic anymore. And probably over another 4-ish months after that, like I was able to like fully use my body again. So it did take me some time to really, I don't like the term fully heal because I've had little moments where I don't take care of myself or stress happens and symptoms come on. But it took about 8 months in total where the symptoms were no longer chronic and basically not there at all. Yeah, so that's really how I got into this approach and started this clinic in Canada to treat people with chronic pain and symptoms. So that's kind of my story of how that took place.
Wow, so interesting that you were originally resistant to the idea, even though you were already in the space and you had all the tools in the toolbox, you just weren't
applying it to yourself because you didn't think you were that person.
It's such a common thing that holds people back. As you both probably know, there's such a resistance to this idea where there's, especially in recent years, there's just so much research and evidence to support that a lot of chronic pain, a lot of chronic symptoms are due to our brain being stuck almost in danger mode or survival mode. And I think the main barrier that prevents people from starting to utilize a mind body approach is they believe that, their symptoms aren't real then. I know Dr. Schubiner talks about this a lot. And, it's coming to the understanding that all pain and symptoms are real. We know that from fMRI studies, from brain scan studies. There's no difference whether the body's damaged or not. If the pain's taking place, it's experienced in the same way. And some of that research was really helpful at the time when I was healing, because I remember reading back then like Schubiner's book, and that was really helpful because I understood that my pain was valid, it was real. It just wasn't being caused by my body being permanently damaged in some sort of way.
So I'm just curious, they found all these little things, right? They found things with me too that they thought were the cause of my pain. And I love when you said that the doctor said you had hypersensitive nerves, because I've heard other clients of mine say that to me as well. But was it the book itself that made you like flip the switch from going from, oh, this might be neuroplastic?
There was a number of moments. The book was a big piece. Starting reading Serrato's book, Schubiner's book, I really related to as well. So that was key because we need the education to understand it. But there was a number of factors. Like a lot of my friends, I'm a therapist. A lot of my friends are therapists, I find. And so at the time, I was living kind of in like a split level with my friend and his partner upstairs, and he would find things like research on psychosomatic or neuroplastic pain, or goes by a lot of different names, and he would like read these things but in like this joking way to me, because he knew, like, he was like, this is what's going on, long before I knew he knew. And so like there was little moments where my support group really supported that idea. So when I came to it, they were all basically like, wow, it's good you finally came to that. So that was really beneficial. And my partner, she was very like supportive of that, and knew that at the very least, my mental and emotional health was having a big impact on the pain and physical symptoms. And so some gentle pushes in that direction from them was definitely beneficial. I remember the moment where I decided like I need to do this completely was really, I had just seen actually the same doctor, sports medicine doctor that had said the hypersensitive nerves thing. I was doing a follow-up, and I met with them for potential other treatment options because nothing was working. And basically they were just like, there's nothing we can provide further for you that's going to do anything but manage the symptoms. And so it was that moment, like I remember going out to my car and being like, I'm done. And everyone comes to that moment differently, but I just decided like I'm done. Like I'm not exploring this medically any further. Like it had been almost 4 years. And so that was like a pretty key moment. And there was also moments after that, but that was a key moment where I made that choice, that like I was going to dive into this and really give it an honest shot and practice these things.
So I think it's amazing that you made the shift. And one of the things you said, that this was scary work. This was hard work. As clinicians, or practitioners, we try to help people and teach them, okay, we're going to do this pain reprocessing. But it's important to know that it's not so easy.
I agree with that. It's not, I always tell people it's not a magic bullet. everyone wants a magic bullet when they're healing, and I get that. I wanted a magic bullet. That's why I was doing all these. I was just treatment after treatment, trying to find the thing that was gonna cure me completely. And a lot of this stuff, it takes consistent practice. I'm also careful we don't want to be too intense about it, but it does take consistent practice. My partner, she's also a therapist at the clinic, and she always talks about her favorite term is consistency, because like there needs to be consistency in doing this work over a period of time to see change. And it's hard work to do. It's not easier, and some people, and it's sad, but some people decide that it's too hard. They're not willing to kind of go down that work. And especially when you get to, well, it's hard in many different ways. Like the exposure work was hard and scary, don't get me wrong, the brain retraining, but some of the processing of emotions and processing of trauma, regulating the nervous system, that takes consistency, but that's scary stuff to start to dive into. And I was motivated because I really understood early on the connection between all of that and how it could reduce my pain and symptoms that were taking place. Like I really understood that connection that was there. So even though it was hard, like I knew it's this, or I'm gonna just keep going down this medical route that I know probably isn't gonna produce anything further. So it was, to be honest, it was a little bit out of desperation, where I was desperate enough, unfortunately, that I was willing to kind of push through and start to do some of the work consistently. That was really difficult.
I wonder at times if the reason why others struggle with the amount of work, because it's not easy and it does take quite a bit of time, is that they need maybe like a different way of thinking about it, like a different mindset, because in their mind, this pain just started, right? In your case, you had it for 3 or 4 years, but that's still a really long time to experience pain. But in the societies that we live in, okay, I just experienced this pain. Maybe it's been going off for a few weeks, for a few months, even a few years. I should be able to apply these things and it should get better right away. What they fail to realize is the accumulation of all the stress and the traumas for their
Yeah.
entire lifetime is what led to the pain onset in the first place. And it's not going to take a few days or, an hour of sitting in meditation or doing a dance class for 45 minutes or whatever it is. It's going to take consistency, as you said. It's going to take some time, and it's going to
Yeah.
take you consistently applying that work.
Yeah, I agree with that, and I like what you said there. How I talk about it with people I work with is kind of like you said, where it's not one event that brought on the pain or physical symptom. Like I think that's the misstep that a lot of people take, where they, and yes, I have seen it where a major trauma happens and the symptoms come on. So it's not just that trauma, but like that is a pretty major part. But for most cases, like pain and physical symptoms, even though they onset at some point, they develop over a lifetime, right? Like they develop over a lifetime. All the moments, like every moment in your life led up to that. And I'm clear with people, you're never to blame for that. I want to be very cautious there. Like they're not to blame for them onsetting, but like what's happened is every moment, like there was things in childhood that I went through that were setting the stage for my physical pain to come on in my 20s. And I think you're right, when people come to this work like pretty quick, which I'm jealous of them because they do come to it quick, like 3-6 months in, I wasn't anywhere close to starting to buy into that. And don't get me wrong, like if I'm working with someone, and there is exceptions, but if you're working with someone that's 6 months into pain compared to 15 years into pain, yeah, generally I do see quicker results for sure. There have been actually exceptions though, where I've seen people 2 decades into pain and the results are really fast because everyone's healing is very different. But that is a factor, like how long the symptoms have been there, of course, is going to have an impact. But it still may not be quick, because you're right. Like it's developed over a lifetime of like all these different moments have led to the sensitization of your nervous system where it started to produce chronic pain or chronic symptoms. And yeah, it's not just some of these basic skills that people need. And it's a lot of times looking back, working on things from the past, processing trauma, dealing with emotions, changing, maladaptive coping mechanisms that aren't serving us anymore. Like there's a lot involved depending person to person that needs to be dealt with.
How do you feel about someone who comes to you and maybe they don't even come to you, because I don't know if I would expect someone who has this belief to come to you in the first place.
Yeah.
But how do you respond to individuals who do experience chronic pain, but they don't believe that they need to address anything? They don't want to talk about anything in the past. It doesn't have anything to do with this. This is my pain that came about because, in your case, I was exercising too much and it was a stressful time in my life. That's all that it was. How do you approach that?
I do see people like that, that come with kind of that belief system. And sometimes it's, I try to be a little bit slow in my approach because I feel like I get so excited about this stuff. And like I think that was a big misstep I made early in my career. I was like excited to work with people. I was too excited and then people got spooked off. So I've adjusted course over time. I think little bits of education, like when I'm working with something, it's little bits of education, explaining the connection to life factors, to feeling safe or unsafe, to trauma, to all of these different things. It's little factors. And with the approach that I kind of utilize, like I start with more of the basic education, behavioral skills, maybe some exposure, things of this nature. And I find that a lot of people just open up more and more as they start to see potential results. They, changes happen, or they feel calmer. Like there's the little healing winds that happen along the way that open people up more and more to that. I think even that happened with myself, where at the beginning I was fairly bought in, but I was much more bought in over time of what I needed to do and what was going to be helpful to actually reduce the pain or physical symptoms. So I think when I'm working with someone, it is these little bits of education along the way. And some people want to start right away and they see the connection to difficult emotions, resistant emotions, to trauma, and they want to start that work maybe a little too quick. I gotta slow people down a bit, but they understand they're ready to go. For a lot of people, that's stuff that I start to focus on a little bit later on in treating someone, just so openness builds over time, for a lot of people. So I think it's a good point though, that everyone comes with different beliefs of what's caused it and what they're willing to work on. And I think that's also a personal preference, for people, right? Like it's voluntary and a personal preference. And if all they want is some of the education, behavioral skills, maybe doing some somatic tracking for the pain or physical symptoms, and that's it, and they want to move on, that's great. It's a starting place. And hopefully over time they open up more to other stuff they want to focus on.
So you treat people with chronic pain conditions. And I'm just curious if you, in your practice, see a lot of patients with pelvic pain.
Yeah. So pelvic pain is a really common one that I work with. As we know, with chronic pain, the most common type of chronic pain would be back, and then followed shortly by neck. So there's a lot of people with back and neck. Another really common condition I treat is fibromyalgia. So that would be probably a close second or third. Migraines and tension headaches are pretty high up, and pelvic pain is definitely within that top 5 of people that I would treat with pain conditions. Outside of that, there's also things like chronic fatigue or tinnitus or dizziness. Like these are other really common conditions that can be neuroplastic. But yeah, there's quite a few people that I've treated with pelvic pain, and quite a few people with a lot of success over time as well, which I think is great hope for people with pelvic pain, that this approach can work well. I think it's such a common question, like on my YouTube channel, that probably the first or second most common thing people are asking is like, could this be neuroplastic, or could this symptom be neuroplastic? And I think it's Schubert who talks about it, but he's always mentioning how, like the brain has full control, right? And so when we're in this state of danger or survival, like any physical symptom can be produced. They can be really odd and bizarre symptoms that aren't very common. Like I've had lots of people with weird ones. I've had a lot of weird symptoms over time that were neuroplastic. And so pelvic pain, though, is definitely probably within that top 5 types of conditions I would treat for sure.
It's so interesting because in 2017, when I developed chronic pelvic pain, I couldn't find that many stories out there. And now in 2024, I have seen so many more people speak about pelvic pain, and many more mind-body practitioners talk about pelvic pain, where you categorize it in the top 5, which is pretty interesting. And it's something that Keneal and I like to do, is just normalize pelvic pain. Just because it's in a part of the body that is, let's say, more vulnerable, it doesn't make it any different that this is a mind-body condition, as opposed to being any different from back pain or fibromyalgia. So it's nice to, not that I want to see more people with pelvic pain, obviously,
Yeah.
but that this is more a common TMS condition.
I agree with you. I think it's really common. And you're right, because it is in more of a vulnerable area. I think it's something that people don't talk about as much, that lots of people, it's really unfortunate that lots of people have more embarrassment sharing openly about. It limits the knowledge that's out there, the awareness that's out there, that this can be a symptom that is more TMS neuroplastic in nature, and a very common one that I would see for sure.
Now, this is a very broad question.
Okay.
But I'm interested in hearing your thoughts, because it's your thoughts, right? There's no right or wrong answer. But what do you think about do you think there's a rise in neuroplastic pain conditions or TMS pain conditions? And if you agree that there is a rise, what could be the purpose? The community, society, the common purpose in the rise of these conditions? It's a big question, I know.
It is a big question. I like it though. Well, as we know, and I'll speak generally here because I'm thinking back. I have an obsession of reading research studies. This is like it's an unfortunate part of my life, but I actually enjoy it quite a lot. But as we know, like chronic pain rates, at least as reported, have increased over the last, I think it's the last couple of decades. Why is that? It's hard to say. Some people might be like, more people are going to doctors and more people are getting, examined. Like I hear that argument. But as I think as we're learning, like, a significant portion of chronic pain and symptoms probably is neuroplastic. And people always want like a percentage. That's a really hard question to answer. I'm not sure what the percentage of chronic pain or symptoms that's out there being neuroplastic, but we know that it's on the rise at least. And so there is an increase. And I think there's lots of different factors. And, one area that I focus on that I think often gets missed in a mind-body approach when I'm working with people, and I'm a social worker by trade, so I think about social issues a lot. And like I think a thing that gets missed, and that also people get frustrated with themselves when they're not healing, is this concept that like at our clinic we could talk about is social safety, because that is key. If you do all the work, if you do change your thoughts and beliefs, which I focus on with people, you do the brain retraining exposure, which is great. You do the emotional processing, and you also regulate your nervous system as best you can and process trauma. But you live in a life or in a society that you generally feel unsafe in, it is going to be near impossible for your symptoms to reduce. I'm not saying that you can't make progress, and I don't want to scare people either, but it's important to focus on that. And so when I talk about social safety, I talk about like, what's the lifestyle? How do you live life? How do you go about functioning in the world? And what are the factors in your life that are either sending signals of safety to your nervous system or signals of danger? And that could be lots of different things. It could be in your immediate familial relationships with your friends. These are things like we know people in abuse situations are much more likely to develop chronic pain or symptoms. But you also think about other social factors, right? Are you facing discrimination in your society? That's a really key ingredient that people need to think about. And that's a harder thing to change, don't get me wrong. But also in your community, do you feel safe in your broader community, like where you live, in your workplace, where you go to school? And so when I know I'm going on a bit of a rant here to answer your question, but it's important to think about because, why has chronic pain or symptoms increased over the years? Well, we also know that the stress people are under has increased over the years. And that's going to have a huge factor. Like what society expects of people is far more intense, in my opinion, than it was 50 years ago. And so in lots of ways, like day-to-day environments. And so there's more pressure. There's more pressure, even at a young age, there's more pressure to do well in school so that you can get into university. There's more pressure to push excessively. There's more pressure to work more. We are less likely to be in community, at least like in a North American culture, right? Like we're less likely to have close relationships, to value these things that your nervous system naturally needs. So, when we talk about has chronic pain or symptoms increased over the years, yeah, I think there's research to support that. And is a portion of that likely neuroplastic that's also increased? Yeah, I believe that is the case. And I think it's also not just about, individual things that are taking place on a micro level for someone, but it's like these macro level things of how we're functioning as a society that is causing basically your nervous system to constantly get signals of danger all the time. And so even if you do your 15 minutes of breath work, which I love breath work, I do it all. I do it every night after my kids go to bed. I do qigong in the morning. Like these are all great things that are benefiting my nervous system. But if I lived in a social group in a society that's always sending signals of danger to my nervous system, it's really going to be difficult for your pain and symptoms to reduce. And some of these factors we can't change, but some of them we can. It's just incredibly hard. And I want to be clear about that. It is like making bigger life changes is really scary and difficult. But when I was recovering, I needed to make those things. There were friends that I cut out of my life, and I don't regret that. Like they weren't providing a sense of safety for me, right? There were ways that I needed to live my life in a different way that honored cultivating, social safety for myself over top of me achieving more or doing more or being better in some way. Because that was really what I drove towards in the past. So I think it's my long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's an important thing that people need to consider along their journey, is not just the little individual internal work that they need to do, but what are the larger changes you need to make to your life and your lifestyle to make it most likely to better your chances for your pain or symptoms to reduce over time.
Thank you. I know you feel like that was long-winded, but it was not, and that was what I wanted you to get into basically was, are these symptoms that we feel on an individual level a sign of something bigger happening on a collective level? Because I do agree that it is a sign, right? Like I look at each of us like an individual cell in the body. And then when we come together, we behave, as a community that's like the tissue, and then the communities gather to form larger communities and societies, and that becomes like the organ or the body. So I see us as like individual cells, and if one cell is having an issue, then or other cells are having issues as well, then we need to sort of step back and look at what's going on here. Like, how is this shaped by the collective?
It's a radical act to go against the natural current of a society. Like it really is. And it's, I say radical because it goes against every inkling and urge you probably feel inside in a lot of ways, because we naturally want to be accepted. There's nothing wrong with that. We want to be accepted. We want to go with the flow. We want to feel like we fit in. And the problem is that we basically are pushing our nervous system past its limits to have this healing energy to feel regulated. And yeah, like there's things that we have to change that are really really difficult choices to make, and everyone has to make those decisions for themselves, but they're really important choices to make for healing to take place.
Yeah. I don't think people really sit down to think about just how much stress we are under today compared to 20 years ago. Like
Mhm.
I'm in not quite 40 yet, but in that age, millennial. And we, like this generation, around this generation is well aware of what it was like growing up without cell phones, without constant email, without the constant communication and knowing that we have today. But it's like we've forgotten that we weren't always that connected. And we see this as a positive, like, oh, this is so great, all this technology. Yeah, it is, but it has its drawbacks. It's the pendulum. We went from one extreme of nothing to the total other extreme of having every bit of information we could ever possibly want in our pockets. I mean, there's other things as too, but
Mhm.
it all comes down to me to just a sense of overwhelm, and that's the easiest way, the easiest analogy, I guess, or easiest example of it is technology. Technology is it's just always there. It's what allows us to be able to talk and communicate to each other with you in Canada and we here in the United States, and to be able to broadcast this to, hundreds and thousands of people to listen to. That's technology, which is great, but it also has its downsides, and
Yeah.
we've forgotten that, and we think so much in the it has to be this or that, but it can be both. It could be all of the above. It could be none at the same time. It could be this and that, one or the other.
I remember hearing Dr. Stephen Porges discuss this, and he talked about in his talk how like people have basically learned their way to regulate is through technology. And like I've been guilty of that in the past, but that's how they regulate. They regulate by diving into a TV show or watching excessive YouTube videos on your iPad, or you know, scrolling on Instagram just for hours. Like this is how we've learned to regulate, and there's benefits to all that stuff. Don't get me wrong. Like, but that's not how your nervous system was designed to regulate. And I think that's part of the issue is and I understand, like as a parent, like I have young kids, like my daughter's 4 and my son's 6, and if it was up to them, they would always choose electronics over basically everything else. Well, not maybe not as much, but like they do like to play on their own. And so like that needs to be, part of my job as a parent is to limit that teach them like there's other ways to regulate. There's other ways we can regulate and have fun and be playful and sit in stillness and quiet. Like these things that naturally our nervous system wants to move towards, we've supplemented them with things that don't breed connection in any way. And we need connection. And that's another thing I talk about with people. You're not going to heal in isolation. It's a really hard task to heal in isolation. And I also empathize with people because I know from personal experience, when I was in chronic pain and symptoms, I was isolated. Like I didn't go out, I barely talk to my friends, like I didn't see family as much. And I had to slowly start to make changes to connect with the world around me again and build relationships and feel safe in relationship is an essential part. Again, it's more of like the bigger level stuff of life changes, but connection's key with some of this because connection, especially well, it has to be safe, but when safe connection takes place, that's how our system can regulate, and that's how chronic pain and symptoms can actually start to reduce over time as well.
I think that this is one of the main obstacles actually with pelvic pain. Just listening to this conversation now and thinking about what I said before about there's many more stories out there with people with pelvic pain, right? That you said it's one of the top 5. But were those stories out there 7 years ago when I developed chronic pelvic pain? Or was it just so shameful that people didn't want to talk about it? And it created this sense of isolation. And because of that, I wasn't or feeling able to talk to people or friends. It's much easier to say, my back hurts or I have a headache than, oh, I'm having certain sensations in my pelvis. And when we connect with others, that's when we regulate. So I find that it's kind of can be like a double whammy that, we isolate ourselves because we're ashamed of the symptoms, which causes us not to regulate. And then we've had dysregulation through many different things that have happened in our lives.
Pelvic pain, it causes further barriers with people where some people even lie. Some people even lie and say like a different area hurts. Like like that's not unheard of. And I relate to it. It was never one of my main symptoms, but it was so widespread that there was pelvic pain that I experienced over time at points. Just never for some reason grasped me the same way that the back and hip did. Like there was more fear around that one. But I think with anyone with chronic pain, there can be this internal like embarrassment or shame that takes place. Like I felt that. Like I was so tired of talking about it with people and like there was some level of an embarrassment or shame. Like how did this happen to me? Like which was of course unfounded, but it was there nonetheless for myself. But with pelvic pain, you're right. Like it's even more extreme. People experience it a lot of the time in that way, and that can be very disconnecting where when we connect safely with others, part of it is about being vulnerable, part of it is about sharing and feeling safe to share, not just the good things. The good things are great, we always want to share the joys and pleasures of life, but it's also anyone who goes through life, there's going to be tragedy, there's going to be hardship, there's going to be difficult things. And when we start to hide away the parts of us that are really, anyone who's had chronic pain or symptoms, that's a big piece of what's going on internally for us. And we start to hide that and shelter that from other people. There is a disconnection that takes place just naturally where, the people around us don't understand what's going on internally and how how much we're struggling with things and how hard it is for us currently. And so there's that vulnerability of sharing. I think that's why a lot of people go to see therapists or like they want to find someone where they can safely or feel safe to be vulnerable with. but part of my job as a therapist is, I always tell people, like, part of my job is to work myself out of a job. Like, like I don't want to be someone's I'm privileged and grateful that people want to share vulnerably with me. But over time, I want you to find other people in your life that you can naturally start to do that with people or community. Yeah, yeah. So I think it's a hard one. It is kind of this double whammy, as you said, that takes place for people with pelvic pain.
Yeah, that leads me to, I was thinking, can someone do this work alone? And I'm thinking for the people who are like, I can't afford to go to therapy for eight
Yeah.
months. I can't afford to see a pain coach, a somatic experiencing practice or whoever, right? Can they do this work alone?
It's a good question, and I think I think lots of people find a way through to do that, right? I'm not saying it won't come with challenges um, and difficulties for a lot of people, but there's just so much content out there for people. There's so many free techniques and strategies. There's so many books and workbooks and every different platform you could think of. Like when I was healing, I didn't even think about, there was no curable. Like this was in, I think I first started healing. I can't remember what year it was. It was like 2015 or 2016, but like I don't think there was curable. There was there was TMS Wiki. There, I think it's still up, but TMS Wiki, people would share stories. And that's what I utilized. Like I needed that hope. I needed to understand that people were going through this. I needed reassurance, and nowadays we have so many resources that people can utilize to get the information to self heal. And is that possible for every single person? I'm not sure about that answer. And yeah, like it is, there's barriers, right? And I think that's the tricky part around some of this. Like even though at my clinic, it is paid therapy, but we try to offer like lots of free resources too, kind of like both you are doing. Like we have a podcast, I have a YouTube channel where I just post free stuff, free strategies, free content people can utilize. So I think there's a lot of information out there to get people started, which I think is really beneficial in a lot of ways.
Well, it goes back to the technology thing, right? Like it's not all
I
bad,
know.
right? Instead of
Yeah.
going to technology to do the doom scroll or the rabbit hole YouTube thing, like actually use it to regulate. Find something that can regulate you. And it can be a downloaded meditation, it could be anything. You have stuff, you have information, we have information, and
Yeah.
we have meditations or recordings of things that we share free. There's workshops, there's so many options for people. So I mean, I asked that question really to just sort of highlight the fact that yeah, someone can do this alone.
Mm-hmm.
I personally wouldn't recommend them doing it alone, doing this work alone, even if it's a friend who understands the journey that they're going through. You had support, you had your partner and your friends who were therapists who sort of knew before you did,
Yeah.
who were sort of planting the seed for you. I mean, it could even be that someone who kind of knows what's going on, but they're letting the journey unfold naturally without being pushy or anything like that. But then there's free information online. Well, is there anything else you'd like to share with us? You already talked about your podcast. What is the name of that?
Oh, I do a podcast with my partner. It's called the Mind Body Couple. It's fun. We have a lot of fun doing it because we're just it's just us talking, which is, I always cherish that time because we're young parents, so we have very busy lives with our kids, so it's always nice even for us to connect while we do the podcast. But yeah, there's lots of episodes and free information and strategies on there too.
And then where else can people find you?
Yeah, so I have a YouTube channel. It's just my name, Tanner Murtagh, MSW, RSW. There's lots of stuff on there. And then, yeah, our company, like Pain Psychotherapy Canada, has an Instagram and Facebook where we try to post daily as much as we can. So there's lots of free content there. And like at my agency, just the way we're structured, we just provide therapy for people that are, like, reside in certain provinces in Canada. So unfortunately, we can't work with people in the United States. But if you're in Canada listening to this, we do offer to several provinces in Canada, and that's just painpsychotherapy.ca. People can check out.
Tanner, thank you so much for being here today. I know your insights will help so many people out there listening. We appreciate all that you do for everyone.
Yes, well, thank you both so much for having me on the podcast and for everything that both of you do as well.
If you'd like to leave us a message or ask a question, please check the show notes with the link so you can reach us directly, or email us at beyondthepelvis@gmail.com.